Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone around there.
Hello, good morning.
How are you guys? How are you, Jaime, Emanuel?
So
Doing very well. Yeah,
good, thank you. So we are excited to start off today's episode of EdTech Chat, and today we have Christian with us as well as Emmanuel. We're both part of the Open LMS team, and we will have some guest presenters later today that will be sharing with us how they are using Gamification. Excited for that. And they should be on their way in. They were just getting resent the link, so we should see them shortly. But gamification, I know it's a word that gets tossed around a lot. Very simply put, it is game based learning and game based artifacts inside of any sort of training or teaching element. So, welcome, and we're looking forward to discussing gamification in today's episode of EdTech Chat. So, our first guest has arrived. Welcome. And Chris, would you like to just say a little bit about kind of how we're kicking things off and where we'll go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So uh, great to meet you, Steve. Great to have you here. The idea is just really to have a conversation about a couple of topics of on gamification. First of all, I want to kind of tell a little bit about Steve. Steve is a web developer. He works for Delta. I believe it's a school. I'm sorry, like a system of institutions, right, in the North
Yeah.
Carolina.
So I work for NC State University. The department is Delta, which is Distance Education and Learning Technology Applications. And I focus on the open source applications such as Moodle, WebWork, and WordPress.
Awesome. And I think it's something really worth mentioning is that you are the developer or part of the development team of the gamification module in Moodle.
Yeah. So I've worked with Delta for 12 years. In that time, I've developed several plugins. One of them is a suite of plugins that is built around gamification and implementing gamification within Moodle.
Excellent, excellent. And we also have here Dr. Edwin Linza. How are you this morning, Edwin?
I hope everyone is as well. Great to see everyone.
Excellent. So Edwin is, your CV is kind of really, really long, but you're a PhD in adult and community college education, right? And you've been involved in themes of play, tourism, recreation. Could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Most certainly. My specialty area is sport management, and I've done quite a bit of work with Steve and Emanuel as well, to a certain extent, with the Moodle applications, which is our learning management system. Primarily, I teach undergraduate students, and typically the typical student that I teach is an entry-level student, freshman, sophomore, trying to find their way about majors, which was what brought me to Stephen's attention and working on the gamification module, and I'm happy to share anything I can with you about my experiences with teaching with gamification.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's really exciting for me to have you here. So I think, Emanuel, you have the word. Would like to introduce us. And in the meantime, I'm going to share just it's a little game for everyone who's joining out here. We picked a couple of words about the topic today. So if you find one of the words that we mentioned or one of the things that you think are related to the issue, to the topic of today, I would love it if you can just share in the comment which words can you find in this word search. In Spanish, we call it word soup. Te like it a little more. But please, so what is gamification, Emmanuel?
All right. So again, thank you to both Steve and Ed for agreeing to join us today and just talk about gamification. And when this topic came up, they were the first two people I thought about So again, thank you both for being here. But gamification, I come from a time where, the Atari 2600 was a new thing, and even potentially the Magnavox had a gaming system, the Odyssey. So I remember those as like the first gaming systems was originally introduced to. But gamification, like how do you take what we did for pure enjoyment or just for the sake of I have the highest point total, and how do we incorporate those things into an educational or even a corporate into a corporate stance? So gamification, by definition, is a strategy that integrates those entertaining and immersive gaming elements into a non-gaming context. So the idea is to ultimately enhance engagement, uh, more active participation, um, motivate certain behaviors. There are things that we want for them that they need to do. And then it also makes tasks more fun and enjoyable. Um, and so that by definition is gamification. I mean, you can go much, much broader with that. Um, and so those gaming elements that are important for us, and if Ed or Steve wanted to chime in, probably the thing that's the most important, the thing that sticks out first of the elements of gamification is points and badges. Um, how do you have points can give you a leaderboard. There's progression levels. There's rewards and incentives. Because there's so many different ways that is actually being utilized, not only from an educational standpoint, but even from training. Because I've worked in industries where we've had some people who were Lean Six Sigma, and that was the first time I heard about those belts. There's belts and levels of your understanding. So you can see it in a variety of applications, but specifically for the higher ed piece, the leaderboards, having progression and levels, the rewards and incentives, and then working with teams is also extremely helpful. So I guess a question for the audience, what benefits can we expect from a gamified learning experience?
Right. So, yeah, of course, we would like people to give us their comments, their questions, but I would like to kind of have a little roundup here of very briefly, how would you define gamification? Well, in addition to what Emanuel has added, like in one sentence, how would you define gamification? And let me start with you, if that's okay, Dr. Edwin.
Sure. In my mind, gamification is the use of those game elements in a non-game form. And for me, what that translates to with students is often they don't realize they're learning, but they think they're having fun. And we hope that two things can be true. I think I've seen so many benefits from it, from increased participation, increased confidence. The idea that I can be wrong and it can be funny and we can laugh at it and we can still move on. So there are tons and tons of benefits. One of the things that I really like that Emanuel mentioned in the early part of his discussion was the concept of leveling and scaffolding. And so there are a lot of terms that we use on the academic side of things that really translate well to games. I'm sure if you look at the literature out there about gamification, you'll find things that are very positive, and you'll find some things that are very negative. And I think, and Stephen and I have debated this quite a bit. You can use gamification for it cannot be, if you don't use it correctly, it cannot be as effective as you might want it to be. And so just using gamification for the sake of saying that you're playing a game is not really where we want to be in academia. I think you have to be very intentional, very focused. You have to think about what your objectives are, your learning objectives. And for me, the course that I teach, that Steve helped me to kind of develop, was an introduction to sport management. And I'll try to make this quick, but in that course, the goal for them is to explore career options, right? And so we wanted them to be able to take risk. and not worry about the failure that's associated with some of the things that they may do in a traditional classroom setting.
Awesome, awesome. Let me give you the word now to Steve. Dr. Edwin mentioned some really interesting things. Like, in one way, you would love to just have fun and don't even think that you're learning, but you end up learning and leveling up. But you cannot just do that because you need to be careful about a couple of things. So I would like your thoughts on this, on the definition of gamification.
Yeah, when we first started developing our plugin, we kind of had to learn what gamification was so that we could build something to support it. The one-liner that we came up with was gamification is the use of game mechanics and game design techniques in non-game contexts. And that broke down for us to be objectives, evaluation, and rewards. So objectives are the things that trigger the gamification mechanics, or the things that present to the user like, I need to do this, or this is what I need to achieve. Evaluation is obviously, did they achieve the objective, or what were the goals, or did they meet the threshold? And then the rewards is probably the most important part of gamification. It's the feedback that triggers the intrinsic or extrinsic need to continue the engagement in whatever they're playing or working on.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think there's kind of a couple of common ideas, and I want us to explore this a little bit deeper. Let's talk a bit on the mechanics of gamification and how it improves learning, because I think it could be a mistake to think that just because you play a game in class, or you kind of add like something like this, just because I added, it is playful, and I think that's also something that we've been discussing before. It's good to have kind of a sense of play around the topic that you're searching, that usually makes any subject more engaging than others. But when it comes to really getting outcomes, educational outcomes from gamification, there are a couple of ways and a couple of things that we've mentioned. Some of things I've mentioned before, others are here in this word search. And personally, I think the way to start, or the way I would start, is with the psychology of motivation, and why do games help us kind of get into a special mindset where we can see things in a different perspective, or we are kind of allow ourselves to focus into specific topics. You mentioned, I think it was Steve, you talk about how in a game, you kind of, not only you are allowed to take risks, but in many ways, the game mechanics encourage you to take risks, probably in ways that you haven't before. And when you kind of understand what the game is about, then you can kind of put a lot of other things like in the back burner, right? And you can to kind of let your motivation just flow through and just start kind of achieving, gaining competency, mastery, and those things that are kind of the part of motivation, until you actually start seeing that you've actually gained skills because of these game mechanics, because of these game elements. So I would like, I don't know if maybe Jaime or whoever wants to talk about this, what would be kind of those principles that we need to take into account when we're starting to think about how to apply a game or game elements into a course or a training. So,
well, I think as with anything, they have to have a clear understanding of the goal or the rules, right? So the first success in gamification is making sure that everyone clearly understands what the goal or the end result of the activity would be. Is it high stakes? Is it low stakes? Is this for mastery of a concept or mastery of a topic? Will this be scored? Are we competing individually or as teams? Because gamification can give us socialization in a typically mono environment, right? So one of the nice things that gamification can add to, especially an online program, if you're not face to face all the time, is some socialization and some playing back and forth. So I think one of the first elements we always have to consider is, have we properly explained what we're doing, how we're going to achieve it, and what our end goal is? Because everyone knows nothing can be more confusing than a game without rules, right? So setting some boundaries as to how the game's going to work and the duration of it is usually step one.
Right. But it's Steve?
Yeah, Jaime kind of spoke to something that we brought up when we first started studying this. Richard Bartle divided people into four types, and you kind of got to know these types when you set up your gamification, because there's achievers, the people that like to beat the game and complete all the objectives. There's explorers who may or may not want to complete the game, but they want to see everything and they want to collect all the things. The socializers, which kind of triggered me, they're there to socialize. They could care less where they are on the leaderboard. And then the killers, who thrive on competition and would rather battle other players than the game itself. So a little PvP action. So not everybody hits all those categories. So if you're trying to hit everybody, you try to, I don't know, balance between them or build something for everybody.
Right. And how about these archetypes? How would you define yourself, like, in a general game?
For me, I'm a killer. Sorry,
Right. Awesome.
I've been competitive for a very long time.
Nice. How about you, Dr. Lindsay?
I'm definitely the explorer. I want to see all the levels and collect all the coins and whatever the case may be. So I think everybody can associate with one of those types.
For me, it depends on what my goals are. There have been times where I've purposely entered a competitive type situation, and it's completely social, right? I want to meet new people. It made me think back to when I took my first job away from NC State, worked in Chicago, and much of my free time and much of even my professional kinds of contacts were social in nature. It wasn't that I was trying to be the foremost authority on any particular subject, but I was just trying to get to know people. And so I found myself going to presentations and meetings that were way outside of my comfort zone and way outside of my knowledge base, but simply just for that socialization. And that's really important. I've noticed that quite a bit in the classes. Steve, you correct me if I'm wrong, but we've been using this gamification model now since about 2014 in my class. And I have noticed each of those types of students in the class that Steve mentioned, from the killers to the socializers and the explorers. The name of our game is called Career Exploration. So, by the very nature of that, there are going to be some folks that are just kind of moving around, and the goal for them is not to win the game. It's just to see what there is to see. And so I've seen a little bit of all of those, and there are times I've had to kind of pull back my folks that are uber aggressive, to kind of not have them to kind of control the narrative, even though they're in the classroom in some situations and online in other situations. They really identify themselves fairly easily. You can identify them fairly easily just by the comments that they're making in the group chats or the forum posts and those sorts of things. So I think Steve's right on when you talk about the different types of people that are there. And from an educator perspective, it's forced me to really be creative, because when I recognize that I have a significant number of explorers, what does that mean for how I use the gamification module in that course? What kinds of secondary, tertiary questions do I ask them, because I know they're exploring? And the same is true for the other types as well.
Yeah, I see that. I think that's very interesting, especially for a game that, or like the dynamics that you design about exploration, career exploration. You may run into people who are not explorers, like by their definition. But it's really important that you kind of really think of what are the dynamics or the things that you're going to implement to kind of give everyone. I think it's kind of, you give the rules, allow the people to allow themselves to be able to try these new kinds and these new careers. But I want to step on a moment or something that Jaime mentioned before, and it's about, well, you talk about like the rules, and it's important that the rules are clear. But I think that kind of opens a way to this discussion of how can we make games like really participative, accessible, equitable, right? So, Jaime, what kind of considerations or things should we keep into account to make sure that games are clear, are fair, and can anyone be part of the game?
Right. So I think first off, obviously, you want to make sure that you have elements in the game for each of the four archetypes that Steve spoke about, so that everyone has a portion or a piece in the game where they're going to feel most comfortable and be able to shine, so that they're more incentivized to try the other areas of the game where they may be a little more hesitant or less likely to dive in. And then, of course, from an accessibility standpoint, you want to make sure that the elements that you're using are visible and readable with screen readers and any other types of technology that you may be engaging in your program for accessibility. And also paying close attention to things like colors and fonts that are used to make sure that those are all applicable to your ADA regulations for your online learning environment. So it kind of goes hand in hand. And then one other thing, since our guests have had the distinct and unique opportunity to be playing this game for so long, I'm curious to find out from both of you what things have surprised you most in the time that you've been playing the game. Because I think you said it started around 2015 or 2014. So I'd love to hear about some of the things that surprised you most, and maybe where you made the majority of your changes after you'd been playing the game for a while. Could you share a little bit with us about that?
Sure, I'll be happy to start that conversation. Like I said, I started playing the game in 2014, and I think at the time, Stephen probably laughed at me so many times because like he has no idea what he's getting into, and that was so true. I was eager. I was looking for ways to create excitement around the course. The course typically has some sections that are not as exciting for students, but it's important content. And for us, it's important that students can make good decisions about where their careers are headed, which was kind of the impetus for us starting the conversation with Delta to begin with. Several things have really surprised me about the game. Number one was that the knowledge level that the students came into the course with surpassed what I thought it was, what it should be, right? So they were much more knowledgeable about many of the subject areas than I thought. And so it forced me to, in mid game, if you will, to say, okay, they're already there. I need to expand. I need to go further. And so I found myself in the middle of the semester trying to figure out how can I stretch their learning? How can I push them to that next stage? The other thing is an equity or gender kind of issue. In the past, a lot of the young women in a course in a male-dominated career path, they tended to take the back seat. But you put them in an online session, or at least have an ability to do it with not having to have those conversations in front of all the guys, and they are engaged and active. And some of the young women in the class surprised me because they're killers. If we use that analogy, they just really go after it. And I had an opportunity to talk to some of them kind of as a follow-up towards the end of class, and I asked them, I said, I've had you in other classes, and not all the times do you comment as aggressively as you did in the course game. And the one young woman admitted, in the classroom, I'm a little bit intimidated sometimes by some of my counterparts. But in that online version of the game, when there's nobody listening at 2:00 when she's posting, And it's almost like you can feel the angry text, the angry posts that are coming through when I'm reading what they're saying. And I can tell how passionate that they are about the subject matter and about some of the discussions that occur. The other thing that surprised me about the process is that I was concerned that I was going to be able to manage it, right? I have a full course. I have, tests, assignments, everything. And in our course, I think, Stephen, we have 75 or 80 elective activities that are there. And my goal is always that if I ask a student to do something, I want to read it. I want to review it. I want to give them feedback on it. And I found that I was able to give them feedback either in large groups or individually, even based upon my normal schedule, and not really having to spend an enormous amount of time in addition to what I'd already done. Now, it helps. I do have a grad student that's a TA, and the student that I have now has been with me a number of semesters. So when you transition to a new TA, there is a learning curve that exists, and those semesters are a little bit more challenging for me. But when you have that consistency there, you can do this. And so I talk to other faculty all the time. I'm interested in exploring gamification, but I'm not sure I want to do it at your level. The other thing that I have found, because I have now transferred what I've learned into my other coursework, is I'm able to use parts of it. I don't have to use the entire course. And so in the 266 course that we taught, one of the things that we did, and probably not knowing any better at the time, is that we attempted to gamify the entire course. And so you mentioned earlier, Jaime, that there are some high stakes type assignments. They're built in, they're gamified, as well as many of the low stakes. And so what I do early in the semester, and I think is invaluable, and we kind of learn this along the way, is I spend almost the first entire class talking about the course game that we're going to play, making sure they understand what the objectives are, making sure that they're comfortable before we move forward, and then just let them know it's just to have fun with it. There is no right or wrong. You're not going to be penalized on anything that's game related. Now, the required assignments, that's a different story. But as far as you making mistakes in the game, that's where you learn. And then the third thing is, I've already got there. I think I have realized that students learn more from their mistakes than they do from their successes. And so I find myself being a little bit, I hate to say evil at sometimes, but I try to find ways to trip them up, because I know they're going to ask questions that doesn't sound right. Let's have a conversation about this. Or they'll, I'll get my phone beeps all the time. I'll get a message. Hey, Dr. Lindsay, I'm working on our course game. You said such and such and such in this section. That doesn't jive with me. What do you mean by that? And sometimes we engage in conversations throughout the day before we get back to class, if it's an in-class group or just online. And so I've learned those three things particularly have been impactful for me as we go through it. And I'm still learning. And so every group is a different group, and I find something that I didn't know before with the new group.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Edwin. I think one of the amazing things is that if you cannot give just a little bit of thought of how the dynamics are, and it's good that they are simple, that you can have simple rules that everyone understands, that everyone can join, and that kind of sets in motion a couple of things, and it's just great for access, but also like for community building. And if you are part of that kind of dynamic where you know that all the rules and it's transparent, it kind of naturally incentivizes you to do your best work, I believe. So I want to know your thoughts on there, Steve, and if you don't mind kind of telling us a little bit of the kind of the technical side of it. Like, how can we make sure that whenever we design a game or set up an LMS, what do you think it's important to kind of ensure that sense of fairness, of equity, of community, as we are all kind of playing to get to learn more?
So the biggest things I think I took away that kind of shocked me were the various types of feedback. And I think that's where a lot of the gamification's value is, and where students are either invest themselves or don't invest themselves in the game. So do you have a leaderboard for the killers? Do you have things that maybe expose themselves as they meet objectives in the course for your explorers. And one of the things that we did that I think was very popular, and we have a lot of variations of, are like landscapes or canvases in the course that evolve as students move through the gamification objectives. So they're rewarded with, we have a course that has a landscape of a backyard, and it's a horticulture course. And as they complete objectives, they gain pieces in their backyard. Their garden grows, or they have a wheelbarrow and it fills with stuff, and the landscape changes. Well, at that point, they want to see how much they can make it evolve. So they're all over the course. I didn't expect those type of things. When I first started, it was like, all right, we got badges, we got leaderboard, we're good. And after learning more, now we're to where we have roadmaps for courses. So as they move through their course, they make sure that they hit all the branches of the roadmap, and then they've explored everything and they've achieved everything. I didn't see that coming.
Excellent. Now I would like us to switch a little bit the conversation to talk about good examples, favorite cases, things that we use or we see that they think like really awesome examples of gamification. So why don't we start with you, Emmanuel? Like what is your favorite example of gamification?
Wow. Honestly, there's so many. But probably the two that stick out to me most. Years and years ago, there was this product on, all the gaming platforms called Guitar Hero. And I was going to get into it and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And it comes with a little guitar. And then I actually looked at what they give you, and it's just like a series of like little paddles, and it's not an actual guitar. And then several years later, they developed, someone along the way, I think the company was Ubisoft, developed something called Rocksmith. It had the exact same elements as Guitar Hero, but you actually plugged in your guitar into your gaming platform. So instead of you just going through the motions of hitting the red button or the green button, you actually had to strike the right keys. So yes, it took and it gamified learning how to play a guitar. So you could learn scales, you could learn simple songs. And then as you improved, it actually opened up the next level of harder songs to learn. Are you doing hammer-ons or hammer-offs? Are you doing slides? Or are you doing bars? Initially, I didn't need that, but this was something that helped me learn those rudimentary things that, if I'm honest with myself, I wasn't going to sit down with a book that I got from like Guitar Center and like, let's go through these scales. Taking and gamifying it that way was just like beneficial. And then after 2020 and being a world lockdown, Strava became like my best friend. With between cycling or just walking, there's always a challenge. There's always something that is going to allow for me to say, you know what, I don't feel like walking today, but I'm in a challenge with some of my college classmates and I'm like 1,000 steps behind this person. I can see it on the leaderboard. I'm going to get up and go walk now because I can't let them beat me. So,
wow, incredible. Yeah. Well, I didn't know about that. Like so it's kind of an educational version of Guitar Hero, a little more
absolutely
technical, with the same.
You actually learn to play the guitar.
Excellent. Should have included this here. Well, here are some kind of the popular games, things that a lot of us use here at OpenLMS, things that we can integrate to OpenLMS platforms. But I'd like to hear anyone else has any other favorite picks that maybe are not here. Or I do have a bit of a story about the Strava, but I'd like to hear anyone else here or anyone in the comments. Would like to know, like, what's your favorite gaming app, whether it's for learning or in general.
And I think it's important that we remind people that if they don't have the benefit of someone like Steve or someone like Dr. Lindsay in their organization to create a game, you can find either for free or very reasonably gamified units for especially skills and skill practice. You can find gamified content that you can add to your existing courses. So while we do encourage you to use lots of plugins and tools to create your own game, if you're not there yet, there are options that you have to start in gamification to at least get your feet wet and to give your participants more experience and engagement that you can add that don't require that you create the game yourself. So just know that there's options all the way from dipping your toe to diving into the deep end when it comes to adding gamification to your courses. I think we may have lost Chris. So while we wait for him to return, Dr. Lindsay and Steve, as you were kind of seeing the feedback over the longitudinal time that you've been doing the game, how has your approach to gamification in other areas outside of this course changed from your experience that you've had? Have you been able to adapt it with your own peers as far as faculty, or has it bled over into some of your other ventures? Where has it taken you as you've become more comfortable with it?
That's a great question, and I'll start. First of all, I guess I didn't realize how much gamification was already around us, right? And everything is gamified. And I'm thinking about I made a payment to my credit card company today, and I realized I've got enough points now, right? And so you're thinking about leveling up to the next thing and what are the benefits associated with it. And I'm saying, well, if I only use the credit card for the next couple of months to pay these things, I will move up to the next level. And so I think what's happening for me now is I'm more intentional about it. Whenever there's an opportunity for me to involve gamification in a training or a group meeting, I will bring in something very small, something very simple, but something that hits the mark. Faculty meetings are another place where we bring it into now. And so, we use Kahoot and we use other things where we poll our faculty in the middle of a meeting, just to get some quick feedback. And sometimes I realize that for me, one of the benefits is that it allows me to direct or more focus, to be more focused in terms of where we're carrying the conversation. So I'm using it all over the place now. And sometimes I think it's happening without me being very thoughtful about it. It's just part of the questioning, part of the experience that I utilize whenever I'm interacting with people.
So one of the things that for us in the development side of things, where it has bled over, we have created a new tool outside of our gamification tool called the Roadmap plugin. And it is a cross between the course outline at the beginning that a student would see, but it's interactive and it changes as the student moves through the course. As they complete activities in the course or objectives in the course, they'll get little stars based on if it was on time or they did it a certain way. And then as they move through, it'll highlight progress bars will move along, so they know exactly where they're at or what they've missed or what's coming up. And we've seen much more engagement or organization from the students as they move through the course. So it's still gamification, it's still a feedback mechanic, but it's also a tool that students use to keep track of themselves as they work through course.
And I'll add one thing to that, Stephen. It's extremely helpful in a distance course where they're not having regular interaction with faculty, when they can see clearly that, hey, and you can even set it up where it has an exclamation mark if you're behind on something. So it brings it to their attention. I need to make sure I get this done ASAP. So
Great follow-up. So I'd like to ask this question, and part of the reason that this came up is, again, you guys were already ahead of the curve, I would say, with 2014, 2015, that you were incorporating, actively incorporating gamification into the learning environment. So one of the things that I noticed, having previously been at NC State, that there was a monumental shift that happened in 2020 with the traditional face-to-face classes now being put into a situation where we have to create either this hybrid learning or this pure digital education model. How did it affect you, or did it affect you as much in the sense that you already had this gamification piece already incorporated into your course? Did it make that transition easier to go into more of a pretty much a digital education like instance?
Sure. That's a great question, Emanuel, and I will say emphatically yes. I was prepared, not knowing where we were headed well before that time. Although I had not used many of those mechanics in some of the courses that I was now forced to teach online, it made me think clearly about how to do so. And while some of my colleagues were really struggling during the early part of the pandemic in terms of just trying to get lectures online, I was already there, and I was already thinking about how can I recreate many of the things that I would have done in class in an online environment. And the tools were already there, so it was just a matter of me sitting down and trying to get at least a week or two ahead of the students and fleshing those things out. And the benefit now is that the courses that I wouldn't have traditionally taught online, they could be taught online anytime now. There's still some things that I should probably clean up, but because I had to kind of transition those courses from a traditional face-to-face mechanism to an online mechanism, it's really created some unique opportunities. Now, the one thing that was an unintended benefit of all that is now that I'm back in class, I've got lectures for everything. I've got all of these activities for everything, and I can pick and choose. And so even though we're face-to-face, I can go back to that content and say, I want to pull just this piece and talk about it in class. And I've got this really cool way that students can engage with it, either before class or even during class. And so I think that's helped me out tremendously, kind of thinking about what 2020 caused us, but how the benefit came out on the other end.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I apologize for my unstable internet connection. So I'm a bit lost, but something that I wanted to kind of bring to the table is this difference between gamification as introducing like game and video game elements to the experience, but also game-based design. And I think Steve, you alluded that a little bit earlier, or the Guitar Hero example. And like a game design is more related to kind of understanding the subject and try to see in which ways the concepts and the relationships between topics in the concept can be turned into some form of game. And I think, well, they tend to kind of be compared, like which one is better. But if you think about it, they really are just different. They play a role in different parts kind of the whole learning experience, right? So it is true that for a game design that kind of really captures a dynamic inside a lesson or inside kind of the environment, you need a good level of subject matter expertise. Like a person really needs to know how a system works, how it interacts, and then they also need to have a really important understanding of the game concepts, the psychology that we've discussed, what motivates people. and how to align them both in order to make them work together. It is considerably more difficult than doing kind of the gamification kind of that is more general and can be applied to the most of the way that we teach things. So I don't know. I want to kind of leave this topic up in the air about this difference. What would be kind of the best way to articulate them, which I think that would be the ideal. And what other things have you found, like with your experience, that maybe like a practice that many people don't realize, or things that people assume that is a good thing but may not be? I don't know. I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts here.
Well, I'll start. I think for me, the risk-taking part is where I'd like to start the conversation. As an educator, I tend to be conservative, right? And so what I mean by that is I like to know what works, and what works well, I'm going to use it. Because of the gamification and inherently the idea of taking risk, it's allowed me to take risk with things that may not work out well. And so each semester, as kind of an internal evaluation, I develop even small groups. The focus is always what worked well, what did not work well. And if there's something that needs to be tweaked, how can I tweak it? The beauty of our gamification module here at NC State, and the fact that we use Moodle, is that so much of what's available to us in Moodle allows us to kind of transition and switch things up. And sometimes I'm fortunate enough to be able to figure out that there's a problem or there's something that could be improved in the middle of a course, while other times it may take some additional planning. The other thing that I think is really relevant here is part of your question was related to, and I guess my answer is related to, I think of game design and I translate that into course planning, right? And so one of the most impactful things that the Delta folks made me do was to finish a course map, right? And as I looked at that course map, I identified resources, instructional materials, and then I was able to go to activities and things that I wanted students to do. And there were times where I said, I know what I want them to do. I don't know how I'm going to make this happen in the construct of a course. But over time and learning more even about Moodle and what it's capable of, I've been able to go back to many of those things that I didn't know how I was going to do, and now have been able to implement those into my course structure. I'm fortunate here at NC State. We have a wonderful Delta staff who's very accessible, and I pick their brains off often. And sometimes they tell me, no, we can't do that yet. But I know if I put that bug in Stephen's head long enough, he's going to figure out a way to do that. So I've probably got a few that I'm going to be sending your way pretty soon, Stephen.
Right. I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe like you guys have developed kind of a set of tools, like some spreadsheets that allow teachers exactly that, like kind of do a proper planning and trying to match their lessons and their activities to game elements, right? What can you tell us about like the importance of planning? And I'm particularly curious about competition. How do you manage kind of the goods and the bads of competitions in a game setting?
Yeah, I think that's one of the struggles of setting up a gamification course. And we kind of preach it that you have to have the full plan before you start. You can't just go front to back and hope that it works out in the end, because you'll either get hyper focused on everything in the beginning and it'll be super stimulating, and then it'll fall off because you didn't have the full plan, or the storyline won't move through the entire course, so it's broken for the students. I think what I've always hoped or hoped did not happen was that you use gamification effectively, and don't make it feel gimmicky, because the moment it becomes a gimmick, you lost all the buy-in that you had. So we have some instructional designers that do a really good job of planning, like you said, with either spreadsheets or a course plan. Build it out first, and then connect all the dots and make it a nice even balance across the course.
Awesome. Yeah. And I guess I'm also curious about how does, because I think you can go one way, and where we talk about the beginning about kind of adopting, let's call it a playfulness mindset around your subjects, and just kind of be more playful in general. But then there's the other thing of kind of actually doing the planning and thinking about like the outcomes and the incentives and alignment and all that stuff. But I believe that one way kind of leads to the other. In your experience, would you say that's true? Like if I start kind of putting kind of rules and setting up the things, all very kind of spreadsheet focus and all very planning, as the implementation goes and students kind of realize that they are kind of playing, I would think that would encourages kind of that playfulness and that kind of a different relationship with the subject and with the teacher and with the class. And probably the other way around. Like if you feel like the playfulness that you've kind of inspired is kind of taking traction, it's good to start kind of, okay, let's see if we can get real outcomes out of this sentiment that we all share. I don't know, what would you think about that?
Yeah, one of the neat things, I think, Ed's course does it, and we also have the horticulture course that I spoke of earlier. Almost half the activities or objectives in the course are completely optional, and they're fun, like you said, and it engages the student to where they want to go and participate, and that's the huge win, right? But in one of the courses, it's a mystery. You get a mystery plant, and you work through a mystery of trying to define that plant or find out what that plant is. And you're engaged. You want to know the answer. So you go through these activities, schoolwork, your classwork, to find out what the answer is. And the drive is there for you. So that's an effective use of gamification.
Right. Awesome. I think I can use a couple of minutes to just kind of touch on I'm not sure if it's right to call them the dangers or kind of warnings that we all should have. I would like to know if maybe you've experienced this and if you take any corrective action. These are more general. And there's probably more, but let's just focus on these 5. So first of all, you have to be careful if when you set up a game, you focus too much on the game and on the rewards rather than the subject matter, or kind of it would be kind of the opposite of the example that you just said. Like you want a game that encourages the student to study, to explore, to learn. A game can be designed in a way where it doesn't do that. And what happens a lot, and I've seen it, for example, in Duolingo, I've seen it a little bit, like there's a point where you get like really focused on that and you end up kind of trying to game the game or playing how to score the most points with the smallest amount of effort. And I think that's kind of a something to be wary about. The other, I think we've emphasized it enough. If the games are not clear, or if there's some kind of arbiter that's too subjective or shows preference, it generates the whole other emotion. It just kind of puts people against the idea of the game if the game is not going to be fair. The other is that maybe you can encourage something that might show like a lot of motivation and drive and momentum, but it's not sustainable over the long term. And I was reading something about the stakes, which is a gamification element that's been implemented across lots of different kinds of apps. I think the most popular example of this is Snapchat. So I've never used Snapchat, but I believe it's a streak is the amount of days that you and another friend have kind of just waved at each other or send a picture or anything. And there was this conference, I think there's a video about it, where somebody asked everyone, hey, who here has a streak? And pretty much everyone in the audience raised their hand. But then he says, how much do you hate having doing that streak? And almost universal, like people get exhausted. There is this extension, this plugin that we offer, this partner, which is motivated. And the owner, I'm sorry, I forget the name, but he talks a lot about motivation fatigue or gamification fatigue. And when you kind of focus too much on dynamics that end up being too simple, that it's also kind of ends up being an issue. And related to that, when the game kind of encourages some kind of toxicity, whether in the relationship with yourself and in the relationship with others, if you are kind of extremely focused on winning, maybe you're too much of a killer and you don't care about anything else and you get angry or frustrated. I think those are situations that we need to be aware of and make sure that they don't happen or minimize its outcomes. So what kinds of other issues have you found or concerns, and have you taken any action kind of to prevent that?
I'll start if you don't mind. And
Please.
I've experienced all 5 of those that you mentioned, so it's really nice to see that somebody's kind of seeing many of the same things I'm seeing in class. The beauty of our gamification plugin is that it's housed in Moodle, and Moodle allows you to monitor and track, and I can look at how much time people are playing or interacting with certain things. And the other benefit is that we have something called activity completion. And so I can limit students' access to certain parts of the game. And so I found that early on, I would have a group of students that were over anxious and they want to muscle through the game in a long weekend, right? And so they're binging, right? And so activity completion, and when activities are released to them, they can only play for a certain time frame before they're forced to wait or till we have some type of follow-up or discussion. And so you can restrict their access to certain pieces of the course game. There is sometimes a lot of competition, and it can be toxic. I have heard some pretty heated discussions among students that are over competitive. My curriculum tends to have a lot of student athletes, and by their very nature, they're
right.
competitive. And so it filters over from practice into the course, and you can hear some of the discussion and things that they're having, that they're talking and writing about. And so I see myself as more of, maybe this is not the appropriate term, but kind of the game warden. A big part of what I do is facilitate, right? I'm in the chat rooms, I'm reading the discussions, and when I see the red flags, I usually will have a side conversation with a group of students and say, hey, I know you guys are enjoying this. However, this is an entire course, and I need you to focus on all of the aspects as opposed to just this one part that you have become significantly focused on. And likewise, there are times where I see students that are not participating, and although it's not required, my question is, hey, are you okay? Do you understand what's required in the course game? And sometimes I get the response, hey, Dr. Lindsay, I have just been super busy, and that's fine. And I tell them that that's okay. So I'm seeing a lot of what you mentioned in the previous slide with those warning areas. And I think as much as possible for those folks that decide they want to use gamification, that's something that they need to be aware of, and they need to be intentional about trying to evaluate those things that can be negative in terms of students' participation in the course game.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, Doctor. Well, we have 30 seconds left, so I just wanted to hear the answers for anyone who was kind of keeping scores, if they got them, all of them. We have kind of a time for a final comment from everyone, or a farewell, or kind of a takeaway. So I'd like to know if we can go to Kane in order. Emanuel, what would be like your final takeaway of this chat today?
Final takeaway: make it a game, but only if it works for what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Awesome, I love it. Jaime.
For me, it would be to just get your feet wet. And if you're not sure, that's a great time to put a ticket in if you happen to be part of the Open LMS family, to reach out to the adoption education team and say, hey, I'm thinking about gamification. How can you help me? We'd be happy to take a look at your course and your program and get you started with some of those elements. So don't be afraid to jump in.
Excellent. Yes, thank you so much. Steve.
I think one of the important things with gamification is to start small. Overdoing it could be a bad thing, but starting small is never really a bad thing.
Absolutely. Start small and go leveling up. All right. So I want to thank everyone here, everyone who joined this session, everyone watching this recording. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.